Now that we've got our navigation section in place, we're going to look at how we can create the top section, which just has some simple text and the basic image. So we're going to look at using section tags, how we can use classes to style individual parts of our HTML, and the concept of clearing floats. So looking back in our document here, you can see what we've got. We've got our navigation at the top. I notice it's just a little bit too far over the left, so I want to move it across to the right a little bit more. So I'm going to add one quick CSS rule to do that. And in the nav section here, I'm going to change the padding on the left to 10%. So again, this is going to be a relative amount, so depending on the width of the window, that's going to adjust. So that's in about the same place as it is on the actual ASUS website, and if you make the window smaller, it still is appropriate, so it scales appropriately like that. Okay, so the next section we need to add, if we have a look at the ASUS website itself, you can see we have a big heading up here, small heading underneath, and this image. In the files I've given you, I've called this image Laptop Trio. So let's go back to our HTML and put in the different content that we're going to need to have. So of course we're now underneath the header part there, and I'm going to add in a section. Now we're going to have lots of sections in this website, so we're going to need to use classes so that we can style each of them differently in our CSS. So the syntax for adding a class is within the opening tag. We use the word class equals, then we use our double brackets, and we need to give it a meaningful name. I'm going to call this one UX because that's the name of the model of computer that we're promoting. Then I'm going to add some H1 tags for that main text up the top, and it was UX305FA is the model number. And then underneath that there was some minor text, so we'll call this an H2 heading, and I'll type in the text that was there. Alright, then the last thing we need to do is add in our image, which of course is an image tag, source equals, and we can find our image from that folder that we have, and remember it was called Laptop Trio, and we can close that tag. Just to check we've got the right image, click on there and you can see a preview of what that image is going to look like. So I'll press Ctrl-Alt-S to save and go back to my live preview, and you can see that we have the text there and we have the image, of course not formatted appropriately yet. So that's it for the HTML for that section. It's pretty straightforward really, so I'll just get rid of these extra spaces I have there, go to my CSS and start thinking about the different properties we're going to need to apply. So all of this text and these images are centered in the original website that we're trying to copy, so we need to do the same thing. So if we go back here and we apply to our section a text align property of center, and go back and check how that's looking, and that's working pretty well. It's centered both the text and the image. Now note that I put it on the section tag and not on the class name that we just defined. That's because in all of the different images, or all of the different sections rather, that we're going to have a look at on the original image, or the original website, everything is centered. So rather than having to repeat that every time, we're just going to put that into our overall section tag, and then it will work in all of the different sections regardless of which class name we give them. Okay, so if we look at our website now, it's not looking too bad. We've got our navigation at the top, we've got a light shadow border there, we've got our text and our image. Now of course this text isn't quite the right size and we need to sort out some padding and other things around there. So let's go back to our CSS and put in a rule for our H1. And we're going to reuse this H1 tag throughout some different sections, so we're just going to have it as a single property rule there. So let's change the font size to 180%. Again, it's a relative size, so we're going to make it a little bit bigger, and we're going to change the padding around the top to, let's say, 20 pixels. Check how that's looking, and that's not looking too bad. Our text is much bigger and there is some padding around the top. Still a couple of more things we need to tweak. We need to create some margin between the top of the image and the bottom of that heading, and I'm going to make this text a little bit slimmer, so I'm going to change the font weight. So remember that was an H2 tag, and we can change the font weight, and in this case I'm going to use 400. For the image, I'm going to change the images that are part of the section so that we don't change the image that's part of the nav, so I'll call it section image, and I'm going to give it some margin, and I'm going to put 20 pixels at the top, and I'll leave auto for left and right. So let's save that and go back and see how that looks. Okay, so we've got our image centered, we've got a small margin at the top, and there'll be a small margin at the bottom as well, and our text underneath there is looking a little bit more lightweight. So if we compare that to the actual ASUS website, you can see it's looking fairly similar. The font is slightly different. We could tweak that and get it exactly right if we needed to, but we won't worry too much about that. We've also left off this section here because we don't have the search functionality, so we're just going to ignore that, but we could easily put in something that looked similar to that and float it right within that header section. Okay, I'm going to leave that video here because we have completed that first section. It's relatively straightforward in comparison to some of the other ones, although the next section that we're going to look at is very similar, just with some changed colors.